Today we're counting down 11 wild facts about Gaiking, the 1976 super robot anime that aired right here in the States, got quietly edited for American kids, and still managed to leave a mark on everyone who saw it. Let's get into it.
Ah! Look there!
Number 10. The aliens were the tragic ones. Here's the twist that most kids completely missed while they were just rooting for the giant robot to punch things. The invasion of Earth in Gaiking wasn't driven by pure cartoonish evil. Great Emperor Desmond led the alien race known as the Zellens, but the Zellens were actually a dying people, forced off their home planet and desperately searching for a new one. That new planet they had their eye on? Ours. Earth wasn't being attacked out of malice so much as out of sheer survival instinct, which gives the whole conflict a genuinely tragic undercurrent that most Saturday morning fare in 1976 simply didn't bother with. Think about that for a second. You've got a show aimed at kids, and the villains are essentially cosmic refugees who've run out of options. It doesn't excuse the invasion, but it does make Great Emperor Desmond something more complicated than your average cartoon conqueror. That kind of moral gray area was pretty rare for the era, and most of us watching Force 5 on a fuzzy UHF channel were definitely not picking up on it between spoonfuls of cereal. It also means the stakes on both sides of the war were existential. That's heavy writing, 1976 Japan. Respect.
It's a Zellen craft, all right.
Number 9. The unsung genius, Dr. Hachiro. Every legendary robot needs a brilliant scientist pulling levers in the background, and Gaiking had one most fans completely forgot about. Dr. Hachiro was the chief scientist of Earth's Defense Force, and the man directly responsible for designing and building Gaiking itself. Without him, there is no robot, no mission, no show. Yet somehow, Sanshiro gets all the glory, which, to be fair, is how it usually works when one guy is doing the punching and another is doing the blueprints. Dr. Hachiro represents a character archetype that was absolutely everywhere in 70s mecha anime. The brilliant, slightly eccentric older scientist who essentially hands a teenager the most dangerous weapon in human history and says, "Good luck." It's a wild amount of trust. In the real world, you'd need forms in triplicate. In Gaiking, you just need a lab coat and a dramatic speech. His contribution often gets buried under the spectacle of the fights, but every time Gaiking fired off one of its signature weapons, that was Dr. Hachiro's engineering doing the heavy lifting. The unsung hero of the whole operation.
Yes, it was thrown into a crevice in the crash and then entombed. Must have been a scout.
Number 8. Sanshiro's secret weapon wasn't a fist. Most giant robot pilots get their gig because they're brave, or reckless, or happen to be standing next to the robot when it needed piloting. Sanshiro Tsuwabuki had something a little more unusual going on. Before he ever set foot inside the cockpit of Gaiking, Sanshiro was a talented baseball player. After an accident, he developed a rare, hidden ability called space energy, a power that turned out to be precisely what was needed to control Gaiking effectively and unlock its full combat potential against the Zellens. So yes, the fate of Earth literally depended on a baseball player's mysterious psychic energy. Peak 1970s anime logic. And we mean that as a compliment. The baseball backstory wasn't just flavor text either. It was the show's way of rooting Sanshiro in something distinctly human and relatable, before strapping him into a robot the size of a skyscraper. Japan's deep cultural love of baseball made him an immediate everyman hero for domestic audiences. For American kids watching Force 5, it translated surprisingly well. A sports kid turned warrior is a universal story. It also set up a fun recurring theme. Sanshiro's instincts, reflexes, and competitive drive carried over directly from the diamond to the cockpit. The ballpark was just the training ground.
I can't believe it. Neither can I! That monster!
Number 7. The monsters of the week were genuinely terrifying. Every classic super robot show needs a revolving door of nightmare fuel, and Gaiking delivered with something called the Dark Beasts, also known, even more ominously, as Black Monsters. The Zellens didn't just show up with tanks and laser cannons. They deployed these enormous, often grotesque creatures as their primary weapons against Gaiking and the Daiku Maryu, serving as the classic Monster of the Week format that structured most of the show's 44 episodes. Each new creature brought a different set of abilities and tactical challenges, keeping the battles fresh and forcing the crew to adapt constantly. For kids watching in the late 70s and early 80s, the Dark Beasts were the part of the show you talked about on the playground Monday morning. Not the plot, not the character development, the monster. What did it look like? How did Gaiking beat it? Did it actually seem scary for a second before the Deathfire sorted things out? That was the rhythm of the show, and it worked beautifully. The formula wasn't new. Ultraman had been doing it for a decade by then, but Gaiking gave it a harder edge by tying the monsters directly to an alien civilization genuinely fighting for its survival. Every beast was a desperate weapon. That context made them feel weightier than your average rubber suit kaiju. Number 6. The Daiku Maryu was a shape-shifting dragon battleship. We need to talk about the carrier ship because it doesn't get nearly enough credit. The Daiku Maryu was Gaiking's primary base of operations, its power source, and its transport. But calling it just a carrier ship is like calling a Swiss Army knife just a blade. This thing could transform into a dragon-like combat vehicle capable of fighting independently alongside Gaiking in battle. Two massive, distinctive weapon systems operating in the same theater, both launched from the same vessel. For 1976 animation, the dual functionality concept was genuinely innovative. You had your giant robot, but you also had its mothership turning into a dragon and wading into the fight. It doubled the spectacle in every single battle sequence and gave the show a visual identity that stood apart from its contemporaries. The Daiku Maryu name itself roughly translates to Great Sky Dragon, which tells you everything you need to know about the design philosophy. They weren't subtle, and they weren't trying to be. This was peak super robot era thinking. Make it bigger, make it weirder, make it breathe fire if you can manage it. And as you're about to find out, the Daiku Maryu's most important contribution to the show wasn't the dragon mode. It was something far stranger. Number 5. The Force 5 Edit, a different Gaiking for American kids. When Gaiking crossed the Pacific and landed on American televisions, it didn't arrive alone, and it didn't arrive unchanged. Gaiking was bundled into a syndicated package called Force 5, which rotated 5 different super robot series throughout the broadcast week. To meet American broadcast standards, the localization team made a series of adjustments. Character names were tweaked, the enemy planet Zella was rechristened Planet Devil, opening themes were swapped out, and certain violent sequences were edited down to smoother, more palatable cuts for younger domestic audiences. For a lot of guys in the 35 to 65 demographic watching this right now, Force 5 was the entry point, not just for Gaiking, but for Japanese super robot anime altogether. You might not have known the show had a different name in Japan. You might not have known the planet was originally called Zella. You definitely didn't know how much had been quietly trimmed before it hit your TV screen. The edits weren't malicious. They were standard industry practice for imported animation in that era, but it does mean that the version many of us grew up with was a slightly different beast than what Japanese audiences saw in 1976. Same robot, same general story, different flavoring on the package. Which raises a fun question. How many other childhood memories are actually localized remixes?
What's going on?
He was after our engines.
Number 4. The head-first combination that nobody else tried. Here is where Gaiking's engineering gets genuinely strange in the best possible way. In most super robot shows, the combination sequence, the moment the hero's vehicle merges into the giant robot, follows a fairly standard template. Parts lock together, something dramatic happens, the robot stands tall. Gaiking looked at that convention and went in a completely different direction. The torso of Gaiking itself was formed by the detached head of the Daiku Maryu. The carrier ship's head literally disconnected, transformed, and became the robot's body core. Read that again. The ship's head became the robot's chest. It is one of the wildest mechanical concepts in the entire super robot genre, and it gave Gaiking a visual combination sequence that no other show was doing in 1976. The skull-like chest plate that defined Gaiking's iconic look, that was the Daiku Maryu's face. This design decision meant that the robot and the ship were permanently, structurally linked in a way that went beyond simple docking. They weren't a pilot and a vehicle, they were one organism split into 2 operational modes. As a piece of creative engineering, it was audacious. As a toy concept, it was absolute gold, and Toei Animation knew it.
I think the captain might be right.
Number 3. Midori Fujiyama, the crew member who did everything. In a genre that often sidelined female characters into support roles, Gaiking gave one woman a remarkably substantial job description. Midori Fujiyama served aboard the Daiku Maryu as both the ship's medical officer and one of its primary combat pilots, a dual role that put her directly in the middle of both the ship's survival and its offensive operations. Her character archetype was what fans would later call the plucky girl, someone who runs headlong into danger not out of recklessness, but out of committed, unshakable resolve to contribute to the mission. For a 1976 super robot anime, that's a more progressive character construction than you might expect. Midori wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was either patching up the crew or piloting a section of a giant dragon battleship into combat. sometimes both in the same episode. She built a legitimate fan base, particularly among viewers who appreciated that the show trusted her with real stakes rather than decorative screen time. In a countdown built around Gaiking's most underrated elements, Midori Fujiyama arguably tops that list. She also set a template that later mecha shows would follow, the capable female crew member who's genuinely indispensable, not ornamental. The genre got better at this over time, and early examples like Midori are part of the reason why.
We are approaching our second Earth base!
Number 2. The Deathfire was launched from a skull. If you watched Gaiking as a kid and one single image has stayed with you across 5 decades, there is a very good chance it's this one. Gaiking's most iconic and devastating attack was called the Deathfire, and it wasn't launched from a fist, or a cannon mounted on a shoulder, or a sword, or any of the usual super robot delivery mechanisms. The Deathfire was fired from Gaiking's chest, specifically from that distinctive skull-faced chest plate, which, as we established earlier, was actually the detached head of the Daiku Maryu. The most powerful weapon in the show was launched from the most visually striking part of the robot's entire design. It's a perfect piece of visual storytelling. Your eye is always drawn to that skull chest first when you look at Gaiking, and then the show reveals that the thing your eye is drawn to is also the thing that ends the fight. Design and function unified in one terrifying moment. In the landscape of 1970s super robot attacks, and there were a lot of them, from Mazinger's breastfire to Getter Robo's various beam weapons, the Deathfire carved out its own distinct identity. It looked like no other finishing move, because no other robot had a chest quite like that. And it connected directly back to the engineering genius of Dr. Hachiro. He built the Deathfire into the design from the start. The unsung hero strikes again.
Full launch! Jen, what's happening?
Number 1. Go Nagai fought Toei over Gaiking for nearly a decade. This is the fact that changes how you see the entire show. Go Nagai is a legend. The man created Mazinger Z and Devilman. He essentially invented the super robot genre as we know it. His name attached to any project in 1976 was a seal of quality and originality. So when Gaiking launched with his name in the credits as original creator, audiences and industry insiders assumed the standard arrangement. Nagai's concept, Toei's production. The reality was far more complicated. Nagai later claimed that his involvement was limited primarily to contributing some design ideas, and that the vast majority of the story, characters, and creative direction was developed by Toei Animation's own staff, without his direct, substantial involvement. The dispute over creative rights and proper credit escalated into a serious legal conflict that effectively prevented Nagai from working with Toei Animation for nearly a decade. Think about what that means for Gaiking's legacy. The show carries the name of the genre's founding father, but the creative foundation was largely built by Toei's in-house team. Talented people who never received the same level of recognition. And the fallout from that dispute kept one of anime's greatest creative minds away from one of its most prolific studios for the better part of 10 years. It's a story about credit, about creative ownership, about what happens when the business of making entertainment collides with the art of it. And it's been sitting quietly underneath a show that most people remember, if they remember it at all, as that cool robot with the skull chest from Saturday morning TV. The robot was real. The drama behind it was even more interesting.
Space Dragon launch!
Bonus fact, Earth won completely. After 44 episodes of brutal, desperate warfare against an alien civilization fighting for its survival, Gaiking delivered a conclusive ending, which, in 1970s anime, was not something you could always count on. Gaiking and the Daiku Maryu finally defeated Great Emperor Desmond and his 4 Heavenly Kings in a climactic final battle that resulted in the total destruction of the Zella Empire. Earth was saved. The war was over. No cliffhanger, no ambiguous fade to black. A definitive, earned victory after a long campaign against an enemy that, as we noted back at number 10, was fighting out of desperation as much as aggression. For the era, a clean ending was genuinely satisfying. A lot of super robot shows wrapped up loosely, or got canceled before resolution, or ended mid-arc due to toy sales data going the wrong direction. Gaiking completed its story. It also gave the tragic Zela arc its necessary conclusion, a dying civilization, a desperate emperor, and an end that acknowledged both the heroism of Earth's defenders and the hopelessness of the invasion from the start. Dark for a kid's show, memorable for exactly that reason. And somewhere, Dr. Hachiro filed his engineering notes and quietly called it a win. So there it is, 11 facts about Gaiking, the 1976 super robot anime that aired in your living room, rewired your imagination, and then got quietly filed under That one show with the skull robot in the back of your memory for the next 40+ years. A baseball player with psychic energy. A dragon battleship that donated its own head to build a robot. A finishing move launched from a skull chest. A villain race that was actually tragic. And a legal war between one of anime's greatest legends and one of its most powerful studios that nobody talks about at the dinner table. Which one hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments, because I'll bet number 1 caught more than a few of you completely off guard. Until next time, Daiku Mariu, launch.